Okay, so now we're going to continue on by implementing the equals method for our list. Let's take a look at the documentation for equals. It says equals returns a boolean and it takes in one argument, that's an object. It compares the specified object with this list for equality, returns true if and only if the specified object is also a list. Both lists have the same size, and all corresponding pairs of elements in the two lists are equal. And two elements are equal if this expression is true. In other words, two lists are defined to be equal if they contain the same elements in the same order, and it should work properly across different implementations of the list interface. So an array list can be equal to a linked list, for example, as long as they have the same elements in the same order. Okay, so let's get started implementing this. Let's first start with the first condition here. Returns true if and only if the specified object is also a list. So let's write that first. If O is instance of list, that will tell us if the specified object is also a list. So if we get past this, then we got to return false because it's not a list. Now if we're inside of here, it might be a list, but we're not sure yet. So also both lists have to have the same size. So now that we know that O is a list, let's actually make it into a list. List O, or list other list equals casting O as a list. Like that. And now we can say if this dot size equals other list dot size. Since we know it is a list, we know that it has this size method because all lists have a size method because they implement the list interface, which requires a size method. Okay, so now we've got the first two conditions here. The object is a list, both lists have the same size. Now let's worry about all corresponding pairs of elements in the two lists are equal. Two elements E1 and E2 are equal if this expression is true. So now we've got to loop through both of our lists. So a good way to loop through lists is to use an iterator. So since we've already implemented the iterator for this list, this should work nicely. So we're going to create a iterator called list1 equals this dot iterator. Iterator list2 equals other list dot iterator. So now we've got two iterators here. We know they're the same size, so we can loop through while list1 dot has next, or we could write list2 dot has next. It doesn't really matter because we know they both have the same size, and we're only going to be calling dot next for each one of them once each time in each iteration of the loop. So while it has a next element, we want to compare two elements from it. So let's do object E1 equals list1.next. Object E2 equals list2.next. Now we know the two elements are equal if this is true. If we find any elements for which that is not true, then we know that we can return false. So let's say, just like that, if this whole expression is not true, that means we can return false. Now if we get past this while loop, and we see that we never returned false at any point, that means that everything is equal, so it looks like we can return true. And so now we know that all three of those conditions are satisfied in order to qualify this object O as equal to the this calling object list. So that should be good for our equals method. Now let's test it to make sure that it works. We'll get rid of this iterator stuff that we've been dealing with here. Let's make another list that we can test with. List2 equals new my linked list string. And now we'll add some stuff to list2. First, let's try adding all the same stuff. So actually I'll just copy this down here. Okay, so now list and list2 should be equal. So let's do print out list dot equals list2, just like that. And we see we got true there. Now let's check out what would happen if we used a different kind of list for list2. So let's make it an array list. And now we know that they both should be equal because they're still both instances of the list interface. And we see they're still true. Let's try changing one of these elements in here and see what if it switches to false right now. Awesome. So now we got false because this last element's a little bit different. Let's see if they're different sizes. We still get false. Yep, that looks good. Let's try if we have some totally different kind of object here. Let's actually just pass in null. And we should see that null is not an instance of list, so it's false. So it looks like it's working correctly here. So that concludes this video.